This is a session within the Future Education Conference devoted to education in science and technology for human security and sustainable development. I will be moderating the session. My name is Nebojša. I come from the World Academy of Art and Science, one of the organizers of this conference. But I'm from Serbia, I'm from the region, close from Istanbul. The panelists are first Phoebe KOUNDOURI. She is from the Athens University of Economic and Business in Greece. Then Moneef ZOU'BI is with us now. He comes from the Arab Scientific Community Organization in Jordan. And Anastassia MAKARIEVA, and she comes from the Petersburg Nuclear Physics Institute, Russia. We shall first hear the panelists, the three of them, then I will make a contribution. We will then discuss among ourselves, and you'll be able to put questions and obtain answers from all four of us. Thus, Phoebe, the floor is yours. Please go on with your contribution.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. This is an important conference. I am sorry I cannot be there, but it is quite crucial to be able to envisage what we need to focus our education efforts on in order to be aligned with the potential of being able to handle the challenges that we are facing. I will share a document. I don't know if you can see my slides. It would be much more helpful if you can. It will be easier to follow my arguments. I'm going to claim two things here. I'm going to say that in order to survive as humans in this planet, we need to understand what sustainable development is and implement it. This is not about the survival of the natural ecosystems of the planet. It's about the survival of humans in the planet. So it is important for us to understand what sustainability, sustainable development is, and not only understand what it is, but have an explicit definition that allows quantification of where we stand against sustainable development and where we stand vis-a-vis our ability to implement it. And our ability to implement sustainable development is, of course, a function of our knowledge, skills, to understand and implement the solutions, and also our ability to produce the solutions, technological, social, fiscal, financial, governance solutions. So in this presentation, I'm going to say that it is a very science and data hectic and knowledge hectic challenge, and it is a challenge that we definitely need to focus on finding ways to handle it. I lead the Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation of IFORIA. It brings together research innovation centers, innovation accelerators, science policy network, and scientific academies with more than 200 researchers working on science-based and stakeholder co-design sustainability transition. Our thematic areas are, again, about this co-designing of a science-based optimal mixture of technologies, policies, fiscal, financial, social, governance, technological instruments that will allow each and every country, and we can even have subnational and international scales in our analysis in order to implement climate neutrality, climate resilience, sustainable use of marine resources, sustainable use of land and water, food, energy, and biodiversity nexus, sustainable finance, and of course, produce the technology, incubate the technology and accelerate it to the market, and at the same time, produce the education that is needed to provide the knowledge in the labor market, to provide agents in the labor market with the knowledge and the skills that are relevant for implementing it. So these 5 are our thematic priorities. And let me very quickly try to indicate why education is crucial, why upskilling and reskilling is crucial, why AI technologies and digitalization in general is crucial, why data is crucial. So in order to transform, you need first to acknowledge that you are facing a crisis for which you have to transform in order to survive because of the crisis. What is our crisis? Well, it's the integration of socioeconomic crisis, slow growth rates, shrinking fiscal spaces. 1/3 of the countries in the world are at the brink of default, inflationary pressures, increasing inequalities between the global south and the global north, but also within countries, even in developing countries, coupled with the climate crisis, the destabilization of the climate transposed into increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events experienced in all countries in the world, and costing trillions of dollars every year in addition to human life. The ecosystem collapse crisis, the collapse of earth ecosystems, land ecosystems, water ecosystems, climate ecosystems, species ecosystems, on which our production and consumption is based. And finally, all of this leading and aggravating geopolitical pressures that lead into war. And if you lose peace, then so we've acknowledged that we are in a state of multi-crisis, and we, as in 163 countries, have signed the UN 2030 agenda with the 17 sustainable goals and the 169 targets within them. And then each region of the world tried to transpose these 17 sustainable development goals into a policy framework. In Europe, for example, my region, because I come from Greece, we have the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal that has been launched, has been announced at late December 2019. And since then, we have voted for 150 laws and regulations, laws that have to do with regulating CO2 emissions and methane emissions and anything that has to do with climate, laws with regards to financial institutions and what is sustainable investment and sustainable finance, laws that have to do with our ambition becoming climate neutral and climate resilience by 2050, and at the same time time by 2030 reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% compared to what we had in 1990. And of course, this means a change of regulations in all the aspects of our economic sectors. For example, Fit for 55, which is one of the laws within the European Green Deal that includes 13 other legislative proposals that have been announced in 21 and voted for in 2024. We have regulations for hydrogen, decarbonized gas, the emissions trading system, the revision of the effort sharing regulation, laws for land use and land use change and forestry, alternative fuels, cap of border adjustment mechanism, social climate fund, including shipping and aviation and cars and vans in the emissions trading system, directives for energy efficiency and energy performance. And this is just an indication. I don't have time to go through all of this. Now, we have this legal framework, right? We have this legal framework. Sorry about this slide change. And we know that this legal framework is a good mirror of the SDGs. We've done a deep neural network analysis that showcases that the European Green Deal laws and regulations are a good transposition of the SDGs, the 17 SDGs and the 169 goals, targets within the goals, within the 17 goals. The European Green Deal is particularly efficient in implementing all the goals that have to do with the regulation of the ecosystems, with decarbonization, with sustainable industry. Is less strong in the social cohesion policies, but anyway, it's there. It's by 80%, up to 80% there in terms of its ability to transpose the SDGs into a detailed policy framework. So we have that. Now, what we need, I'm really sorry about that. What we need is to figure out how we actually go about implementation, okay? So in order to implement something, you need to measure where you are, you need to know where you want to go, and you need to develop the pathways, the optimal mixture of policies and regulations and technologies and solutions and fiscal and financial instruments that will allow you to implement. So we know where we want to go. We have our SDGs and the transposition of these SDGs into a very detailed policy framework, the European Green Deal. Do we know where we are? Do we know our initial conditions today? Well, we know that as well as SDSN. We measure every year the performance of each and every country with regards to each SDG. So we know where each country stands with regards to the SDGs. We know the average performance of all the countries in the world. We know the performance of each of the ecosystems. We know the European Union's performance. We know the performance of each country within the European Union, and we know it in detail. Of each indicator, we use 300 indicators to measure that, and we also have projections to 2030, so we know where we are lagging behind, we know the pace of change, we know the pace of progress or no progress, so we know where we are. And we can downscale this knowledge to city level, local authority level, even company level and institutional level and university level. So I am saying here that we know where we are and we know where we want to go. And now we have to construct the pathways. Now, even before trying to construct the transformation pathways, how we are going to move from where we are to where we want to go, you can see how data hungry this investigation is. only to understand the legal framework and sort it out is a very data-intensive process, a text mining process, to understand the different regulations, their synergies, their trade-offs, and figure out how they can combinedly be implemented. Then the other process of measuring where you are is again very data hungry. You have to be very articulate with regards to collecting the data. It is not explicit. It is not obvious that it is collected by the different scales. It is very difficult to be consistent over time and across space. It needs a lot of effort to do that. So it needs a lot of science effort to translate the target, the goal into indicators, and then to consistently collect the data for the indicators. And each sector of the economy has to do this. Each level of governance has to do this. Each institution, each company, and so on. So we need a lot of capacity and a lot of organizational capacity, but also scientific capacity and financial capacity to even be able to measure and agree where we are and where we want to go. And then the difficult part kicks in. The difficult part where you have to combine the models of the different systems that are involved, the climate system, the energy system, the transport system, the land use system, the marine use system, the health system, the innovation system, the socioeconomic system. We have models in the Global Climate Hub that for each of these systems, we run these different systems downscale to the national and subnational level. We derive the dynamic pathways of these systems in order to become sustainable. And then we integrate the pathways of the different systems and embed them in socioeconomic general equilibrium systems in order to come up with implementable and affordable pathways for each and every country that makes sense in the international level. For example, in the energy system, we use the Balmorel system, which is a very holistic open source energy mathematical model for optimizing investments and operation of power, heating, and hydrogen. It's a very, very big model that at the end of the day will give you optimal expansion generation and transmission, dispatch information, electricity prices, and plant revenues, and CO2 emissions. And this is a report that we produced for COP28 in Baku. We presented it that showcases how the Balkans and the EU and the UK, this area of the world, can become 2050 climate neutral, implementing the relevant regulations of the European Green Deal. And at the same time, not only we identify the optimal mixture of energy sources, but we also identify the green corridors, the trade for energy in order to achieve energy security and energy climate neutrality in the countries. And we have done the same exercise for the hydrogen, where you can see in the small box. And this is done for each system. For example, the land use system, for which we work in all the green countries that you can see here, we have a very extensive mathematical calculator that identifies what is the way that the land use of a country, taking into account food, agriculture, biodiversity, land use, and energy, can achieve simultaneously food security and nutrition, greenhouse gas emission goals, biodiversity goals, and sustainable use goals. And then when you have the pathways for the country, for these systems, we try to integrate integrate them using another model of water requirements into understanding how the energy system, the water system, and the land system come together into producing the pathways of the country. And then we also use remote sensing to detail land uses and make sure that the way we construct these pathways is consistent with the requirements of the SDGs and the land use directives of the European Green Deal in terms of soil quality, in terms of water quality. I'm wrapping up. So there is a lot of modeling, resilience modeling, maritime modeling that needs to be integrated into the solution. And the second layer of the solution is, of course, the co-design by the stakeholders. The stakeholders are the politicians, the policymakers, the technology developers, the financial institutions, the businesses, the civil society. They have to be in the process of designing these pathways to bring their knowledge, their experience, their visions, their worries, their preferences, and only if they own the solutions and they have shares for the projects that are going to be implementing the solutions, they are going to be rigorous and incentivized into actually implementing the solutions because they are the ones who are implementing the solution. And one crucial element in this incentivizing of the stakeholders to be part of the solution is, of course, if they have the knowledge, the capacity, and the skills to actually be part of this co-design and implementation, be part of the labor force that is going to implement the solution. And in this report that we presented in Baku, we do an AI analysis to answer two questions. The first question is exactly which skills our education institutions and our upskilling and reskilling vocational training institutions should focus on. We have identified all the skills that are needed in order to implement SDGs and the European Green Deal in Europe in much detail, green digital skills, and then identify the occupations that need to exist in order to implement all these 150 policies and regulations. And after identifying it, we ask the question, how much of this is already in the labor market? And the disappointing answer is only 15% of this is in the labor market. So what do we need? We need serious investment in upskilling and reskilling and transforming our curricula in the education system, all levels of education, in order to truly have the people to implement the policies that are crucial for our survival. The Global Climate Hub, and this is my last sentence, has an infrastructural digital platform that brings together all the data, the models, the results of the models, and tools for the stakeholders to use all this information, decision support tools, virtual reality tools, digital twins that allow them to use the information and science and technologies that is there to sketch the transformation pathways. But even if all this exists in open access, complete open access mode, in order to actually have an impact on the stakeholder and their engagement with the transition, you again need to have stakeholders that know what all this is about, that have the knowledge and the skills. So again, we are pointing to the huge and imminent need to actually produce those skills and that knowledge that will really engage the stakeholders in the transformation. Thank you.
Okay, Phoebe, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in the discussion session. Now, I'm asking Moneef to contribute to the session. Please make it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Moneef,
Thank you
please.
very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this session. I'll be speaking in my capacity as the science advisor of the Interaction Council because I'll be touching a little bit on the politics of science and science education. Now, firstly, very quickly, let me remind myself and everybody of what's on the global radar at the moment. Well, we have war in the Ukraine, in Gaza, in Syria. That is very much on the global radar at the moment, unfortunately. And what's happening in various parts really must outrage us as human beings and must call upon us to rethink our values. Peace, as manifested by the Agenda for Sustainable Development, eloquently addressed by Phoebe a few moments ago, that to me is not only an agenda for sustainable development, but it's actually a target for peace, global peace. I normally sum up the agenda for sustainable development by looking at issues that concern me most. We talk about water insecurity, energy insecurity, health, particularly in the light of the pandemic that grounded us at our homes only 2-3 years ago, agriculture, biodiversity, climate change, and again, peace. And to my mind, I would propose that the agenda for sustainable development really is one side of the peace coin, with the other side being the question or the issue of human security as adopted by the World Academy of Arts and Science and as often used as a discussion point to convince politicians in the various parts of the world of the value of providing human security to their population. Now, whether we talk about the agenda for sustainable development or human security, science is the key. Science matters. Science, to my mind, is the tool that we can use to achieve peace, to achieve sustainable development, and to achieve human security. And this was very much prominent in the discussions leading up to the development of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, and it was owing to the efforts of a number of organizations, including UNESCO, that science was adopted as a means, as a cross-cutting means or tool or mechanism at our disposal to achieve sustainable development. There are other science-based tools, including science diplomacy and science education. And this is a quote from a good friend of mine who's a WAAS fellow as well. Essentially, Professor Zachary here talks about the critical role that science plays in achieving the SDGs through a number of activities, including the promotion of education, research and development, technological dissemination, as well as the design and implementation of nationally appropriate industrial policies. So let's go back to science education, which is like the underlying theme of this session. Academies, whether academies of sciences or the Academy of the World Academy of Arts and Science, has a role in building up the science culture at the societal level, in educating, but not only at the school level. We need to cultivate a culture of science within society. It's not enough for the science, technology, and innovation engine to move forward to focus on science education at schools, but we need to promote also the culture of science at the societal level. We need to promote science education in schools, and we need to promote science education and scientific research at universities. And indeed, many of the world academies, including WAAS, have long realized that this is an imperative, this is an objective that we have to aim at. Indeed, the US National Academy of Sciences had focused on this many years ago and published a very important report a few years ago. You can check that on the internet. It was called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. The French Academy of Sciences also was involved in promoting science education through a very special program, La Main à la Pâte, a few years ago, as well as other academies. And it was, this is a paper that I was fortunate enough to publish about 10 years ago. It talks about science education in the developing world, in the Islamic world, and talks about the efforts that the US National Academy of Sciences undertook, and refers to the report on Rising Above the Gathering Storm. It talks about the efforts of Professors Pierre Léna and Yves Carré of the French Academy of Sciences in the domain of science education, and cites an exciting example by in South Africa, where former President Nelson Mandela really commissioned the National Academy of Sciences of South Africa and challenged it to inspire the country's youth to seek careers in science, engineering, and technology. So that's one aspect of science education that I feel I wanted to talk about, and I have. Now, the nexus, to my mind, is not only educating school kids and university students, but also educating politicians, societal leaders, because there's a gap, as you all know, between scientists and science and societal leaders and politicians. Both communities think differently about things. Very few politicians understand the possibilities of science or understand the limitations of science. Many politicians have to adhere to budgets. They have to keep an eye on their popular ranking within the population. And many of the scientists do not really understand the mechanisms of politics or parliaments. Many do not have an idea of the political processes or appreciate the pressures or timescales that politicians adhere to. And this is why I think it's imperative to really establish a common ground between politicians, societal leaders, decision makers, and scientists, not only to enhance science education at schools and universities and increase resources allocated to research and development, but also to encourage scientists to come up with solutions and to try and achieve the agenda for sustainable development, particularly in light of what's happening on the global arena in terms of disruptive technologies that are impacting our lives and would be, as well as the rise of artificial intelligence as a tool that we really need to think carefully about as to how we can best utilize this tool to contribute to world peace via contributing to an agenda for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
So I'm studying more specifically the interaction between natural ecosystems and climate in a quite interdisciplinary perspective and framework. And my experience has been that our efforts towards sustainability are to a large degree hindered by the fact that we don't see the system in full, like what actually determines the sustainability of our home, or of the earth. And those natural ecosystems that still retain the homeostasis, they are often left out of the discussions, and we only add them to the discussion when we discuss land use, when we discuss water use. So from the this perspective of using them or from mitigating the damage that we have done. But what is missing here, and what I think is important to include into like informing the younger generations, is that these systems, most importantly, the so-called intact forest landscapes that still exist and occupy about 9% of ice-free land area, they exert a very important stabilizing impact on the Earth's climate and environment. And when we don't take it into account, all our strategies can be misguided. Just one example, as Phoebe was talking about the really impressive efforts in Europe towards sustainability, which also include rewilding and setting aside territories for nature. But this comes along together with importing, for example, of wooden pellets from North America and South America. And this is interpreted as green energy and an effort towards sustainability, but this causes enormous degradation of natural ecosystems and those ecosystems that are not undisturbed, but they are evolving into this state. For example, our American colleagues are trying to stop this degradation of their already old growth forests that are decimated to produce wooden pellets that they are transported, say, to Denmark, which is now trying to rewild its territory. And then when we have forests decimated by overexploitation in Canada, then we have these huge fires, and then we have the drought in the Amazon, and then this contributes, as the recent paper in Science says, to the decimation of low level cloud, and we can see an uptick in global warming. So efforts without seeing the bigger picture and the role of natural ecosystems in planetary homeostasis, we can actually make our situation worse, even if we have the best intentions. And as Einstein is said to have stated once, whether we can observe a thing or not depends on the theory which we use. So if we don't count the impact or stabilizing impact of nature and climate into our worldview, we won't observe it irrespective of how much data we get. So I think it is very important to have this conceptual vision of the role of the still remaining natural ecosystems play in our not just well-being, but simply being. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
I will now make my contribution, and I will present to you transdisciplinary science, technology, and education model. But just to mention explicitly the existential problems and challenges facing the Earth and humanity today, just to understand the context. These challenges, as I see it now, depletion of natural resources, then pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss, then political, economic, and military interventions, then forced migrations, intercultural conflicts, and wars, and finally, human inequality and inequity. The requirements for a proper approach to these problems and challenges have been defined by A, human security dimensions, and 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You have heard about that many times. But these goals and dimensions taken together represent the complementary parts of a core of a well-defined strategy. However, as the panelists have said several times, the current state of affairs is such that serious concerns about the ability of humankind to carry out them by 2030, as it was planned, are raised. Today, it is clear that the problems and challenges in question have complex and multidisciplinary character, while the efforts of scientific, technological, and educational communities worldwide to respond to them are mostly limited to separated disciplines. Therefore, a systemic and multiple disciplinary approach in looking for and finding their solutions is necessary. This approach, which should lead to sustainability of nature and society, as well as human security and peace, needs an inclusive, scalable, and effective science, technology, and education model. Such a model has been created as the basis of a program of sciences for sustainable development, initiated by the World Academy of Art and Science and launched recently in April this year by the Earth Humanity Coalition. The program is an initiative within the overall program of the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development from 2024, from this year to 2033. That decade was proclaimed by the UN, United Nations General Assembly, in August last year. The model has been named the Transdisciplinary Science, Technology, and Education Model. I will very briefly present the model, just give the essence, the basis of it. First, acquiring knowledge along the chain of basic, applied, social, humanistic, and technological disciplines within the disciplinary boundaries. We cannot forget disciplinary research, but that must be complemented with true and effective transdisciplinary efforts. Second, education in basic sciences should exist at all levels with the objective to develop as much as possible curiosity, courage, creativity, and persistence among pupils. 3, special care should be taken about big science, being a science with big machines and experimental setups, to enable the establishment of direct, strong connections of basic science with engineering, medicine, and high technologies, and to contribute to mutual understanding and peace to numerous conflict regions worldwide. 4, researchers in social sciences should develop and nurture a trans-ideological approach to sustainability, security, and peace, in which all existing ideologies will be analyzed in the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary ways to provide the basis for their transdisciplinary synthesis. 5, researchers in humanistic sciences should concentrate on defining the values that must be accepted on the pathways towards sustainability, security, and peace, and finding the answers to the ethical questions appearing every day on these pathways at the local, national, regional, and global scales. 6, special efforts should be made to enable the influence and enrichment of the results of science being objective, and the results of art being subjective, and thus push further the boundaries of a true understanding of nature, society, and human beings with all these interrelations. And finally, 7, novel ways of communication and cooperation of scientists, technologies, and educators on one side, and policymakers and all other science, technology, and education stakeholders on the other side, based on sincere, mutual respect and trust must be developed. Moneef was talking about. That has been a brief presentation of a model, and I have completed the presentation. Now, let us move to discussion. And first of all, we have about 10 minutes left for the session. And I'm first asking the panelists to put questions to each other if they have them at the moment, very briefly, and then to try to provide some time for the questions from the audience. Phoebe, Moneef, Anastassia, please, if you have questions, go on.
I can start by saying that it is important that the multilateral financial institutions, also the financial institutions within countries, the national financial institutions, finance infrastructure, finance digitalization projects, finance natural resources projects. But what seems to be more important than financing these projects is to include in the in whatever you finance in terms of a project or a transformational holistic change, to include capacity building. Capacity building for all the people that will be involved in this, capacity building for the general public, for the civil society, for the businesses, for the even the financiers, those that are financing all these things, capacity building for the politicians and the policymakers, capacity building for the professors and the teachers, so that whatever you build with the cutting edge technology and knowledge, and whatever you build with an integrated holistic framework, which is the correct way to go about, like you said, Nebojša, it's about interdisciplinarity and systems science and systems thinking. But because the knowledge about how these things work and how you can use them, even if you have them there, each and every project for me should be accompanied by the relevant capacity building budget. And it is not cheap to create knowledge and capacity. So this should always be at the back of the mind of anybody who is designing a project to support the transformation towards the SDGs, the needed capacity building. There should be a budget for that at a level of education and at vocational training level as well. And I've been wondering whether you know of such projects, you've been part of such projects that bring out the capacity building needs explicitly.
Okay, Phoebe, thank you for the comment. Anastassia, Moneef, any question or comment to all what you have heard so far, please?
Yes, very, very quickly. I think what Phoebe just said is very important. Everybody is aware of the Sustainable Development Goals in all countries. Many politicians are also aware of the agenda and are trying to implement policies to achieve the various goals and the targets. However, there are gaps in the understanding of many politicians and societal leaders in terms of how they can go about developing policies to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And if they know, those who know the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals sometimes lack the capacity, as Phoebe just said, whether intellectual capacity, financial capacity, institutional capacity to implement, to try to achieve the goals, or even monitor achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So that is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. Many of the taken for granted measures adopted in Europe are nowhere to be seen in developing countries in terms of Sustainable Development Goals. So I think a massive all-out effort, if we are really to achieve as human beings, regardless of where we are, if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to share best practices, we need to share capacity to implement and monitor, we need to share financial resources to help less developed countries do something about the Sustainable Development Goals. And we need to, at least first and foremost, realize that we are sharing the same planet. It's no good having somebody address sustainable development in Europe, for example, whilst, for example, the other side of the Mediterranean in North Africa, nothing is being done to address sustainable development. So that's the message I think that I would want to convey. Sustainable development is transnational, trans-regional even, and it has to be a global effort.
Thank you, Moneef. Anastasia, if you have a comment, we have a few more minutes.
Yes,
the end of the session.
just a very brief comment. I was talking about the need to elevate the focus on the preservation of still functional, sustainable ecosystems. And just here I would like to mention that while we aim at sustainable development, it hasn't been proven that it is at all possible. So, and we can develop indicators and move in some directions, but whether we get there, it is not guaranteed, and our progress hasn't been very impressive as we all recognize. So, but we do have actual sustainability in front of our eyes. It is the natural ecosystems that are working on the basis of not producing pollution, regulating climate, regulating the atmospheric moisture transport that alleviates water stresses that are now ravaging the world. And so this should be an integral part of any major educational program, any discussion on sustainability, and it shouldn't be buried under other formal categories of and many different aspects of what we would like to see in our life. And what Nebojša, you said about the need for basic education and basic science, I would add that this education should include basic information about how the biosphere works. For example, even in this audience, can anybody answer how much the biosphere cycles carbon in relation to our emissions? This is very basic knowledge showing the capacity of the biosphere to influence the environment. But I bet very few people can immediately respond. And this shows a very disturbing level of ecological and environmental illiteracy with which we can't go far towards sustainability. So this should be improved, in my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Can I say something very briefly? One other very big challenge, and I agree with the previous speakers, is how we can escape from our non-disciplinary, our disciplinary silos to the interdisciplinary, not just the research, but also education. This needs a deep transformation of the curricula of all stages of education, the primary schools, the pre-primary schools, the high schools, the universities, And we know as academics how long it takes to revise curricula, to transform curricula, and transforming into interdisciplinary curricula, and creating awareness about the need not just for interdisciplinarity, but also intradisciplinarity, allowing the stakeholders to have a say. I think we are already hugely delayed in putting emphasis on this effort, because it is only through education that we can change. And we know what we need to change, but our education systems have not changed yet.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. Unfortunately, we have to finalize, to finish this session. I'm thanking very much Phoebe, Moneef, and Anastassia. This has been the Education and Science and Technology for Human Security and Sustainable Development session within the 7th International Conference on Future Education. And I hope you have enjoyed the session. Thank you very much.